What's up guys, Asian here again with another build guide video. This is going to be part 3 of our healing guide. This is on my Templar healer. I'm just going to show you guys kind of how I heal things, heal dungeons in particular in this particular video. I'll show you guys a Trials healing guide as a kind of a part 3.5, part 4 video later on. So this is just going to be me running through Falkreath Hold. Now you guys will kind of get an idea of what to prioritize as a healer, what abilities to do, whether or not healers actually have a rotation or not. I'll also show you guys a couple of boss fights as well. So right now we're just going to go ahead and clear some trash, and you can see kind of this is how I go about healing through trash on dungeons, 4-man content. Mutagen is particularly useful for 4-man content, because all you have to do is hit it twice and it will put a nice heal over time for all your friends. Depending on where you are in the ad pool and whether or not you have a boss coming up, you can use your Warhorn, or you can just use Practice Incantation, the Templar healing ultimate from Restoring Light, or you can use Panacea if you'd like. See here, I'm trying to get a heavy attack pull every once in a while, just so I am topped up on magical all the time. For trash, I'm not 100% concerned about applying elemental drain on everything. Where I can, I will put them on, especially on priority targets like these minotaurs here, but it's not a huge concern for me. The bigger thing for me is combat prayer, trying to keep up combat prayer. I tend to use Combat Prayer and Healing Springs as my primary heals. I try not to rely too much on Breath of Life in 4-man content, and definitely not in 12-man content, because Breath of Life, if you guys have seen my previous healer videos, you'll know that Breath of Life is not necessarily a smart heal. So being able to direct who gets your heals with Healing Springs and Combat Prayer is obviously very useful. You'll also notice that I try to keep a shard or an orb out at all times. This is just to help DPS and tank maintain their resources. For 4-man content, you don't really need to be throwing out that many orbs. There's normally not that much damage going out, but having an orb out at all times is very useful, just because it provides such a powerful heal over time. I've tested it. If you toss an orb and it flies across perpendicular to somebody, it ticks 10 times, and you can get multiple orbs to tick on the same person, so one person can be affected by multiple orbs. So it's a very, very powerful healing ability, not just for the synergy, but just the heal itself is very powerful, so something to keep in mind. So generally speaking, for ad pulls, what you're going to want to do is just want to make sure everybody has at least one heal over time out, whether that's an orb or mutagen or rapid regen, something like that, and then just use Combat Prayer here and there. Definitely elemental drain the priority targets, which are going to be, for example, minotaurs in the new DLC dungeons. Generally the bigger ads are kind of what you want to elemental drain. The rest is just kind of, if you have the opportunity to do so, then do it. Otherwise it's not that big of a deal, because trash is not quite as dangerous as actual bosses, and hitting the resistance cap is not quite as important. If you can, definitely try to keep a shard or an orb out on the field at all times. It's definitely very useful for DPS and the tank, just to keep the resources topped up for the next trash pull. Because depending on how quickly your group goes, this is something you can discuss within your group if you're in a voice communication channel like Discord or TeamSpeak, or just through a group chat before you actually start the dungeon, just to get a sense of how quickly you have to go through it. Having those, or keeping your DPS and tank topped off, is pretty important. You can also see there one strategy that you can use is, if you know you're going to start a pull, is to toss orbs ahead of your tank and healer. So if they do manage to get hit by a surprise attack, then they at least have a heal going on that might be able to save them. So you can see I'm trying to position myself so that I'm always behind the action, not too far away. Combat Prayer does have a 18-meter length that it can travel. But I always want to make sure to try to hit all three as much as I can with my Combat Prayer. So I'm trying to line myself up in such a way that I can hit all three of my allies with a single cast of Combat Prayer. You'll see later on in a couple of boss videos, this one coming up, for example, that I might double cast Combat Prayer in multiple directions, just so to make sure that everybody has it. Combat Prayer is definitely a buff that you want to try to keep up on your DPS and tanks at all time. DPS for the minor berserk, tanks for the minor resist buffs. But even a DPS will appreciate the extra resist because that's an extra 2%, about a 2% reduction in the damage that you're taking. For this part of the video, we're just explaining the fight to the tank. This tank is new. So for bosses, what I like to do is I like to toss out an orb as we are walking into the boss. Again, in case a boss decides to surprise us with this surprise move, at least I have a heal over. I have the orb out to heal us. That might be able to save somebody from a dot or something that the boss applies. Try to make sure I have mutagen up as well on everybody before we enter. You see, I didn't quite have that. For these multi-boss fights, you want to apply Ellie Drain here and there. Now you see here the tank is separated from the DPS, so I am trying to keep an eye on the tank, but do keep in mind that sometimes the tank should be able to self-heal and have enough sustain to not rely on you entirely for heals, but depending on how experienced your tank is and the content you're running, you might want to make sure to keep an eye on the tank, throw him an orb here or there, not only to heal them, but also to make sure they have enough resources. You see here, I used Warhorn right away off the bat, depending on when your tank is going and what you want to go for. You can cast your Warhorn right when you have it ready, or you can wait for a more opportune time. So for us, we want to get this boss down as quickly as possible to avoid the ghost, so I used my Warhorn right when he popped up. See here, I'm trying to follow DPS around more than the tank. I do have an eye on the tank from time to time. Toss him an orb, make sure he has mutagen on at all times to make sure he's not dying on us. But the DPS generally are squishier than tanks, obviously, so you want to make sure that they stay alive. You can see I'm tossing an orb, throw out a healing spring for him, then heavy pull to make sure that my resources are all the way up. So you can see I'm staying far enough away that I'm not in immediate danger of getting hit by any AoEs, but I'm also close enough that my springs and my Combat Prayer will be able to hit my allies. Throwing out orbs here and there, especially to just make sure our DPS are topped off for this part of the fight. Making sure to lay down Lightning Wall whenever I can to get that off-balance uptime. It's especially important in 4-man content because oftentimes you are probably going to be the only one, or one of only two if you have a stamina DPS, so trying to keep that Lightning Wall up is pretty important, but again, if you can't do it, then don't worry about it. So that's kind of an idea of how I heal vet dungeons. You can kind of get a sense of kind of what you should prioritize. Combat Prayer buff is probably going to be your main priority here, and making sure to keep a heal over time on your allies, whether that's through mutagen or through an orb. Definitely try to have a shard out at all times. Ellie drain the bosses and the big adds. Don't necessarily waste your time Ellie draining every single ad that you pull, and try to keep a shard out. It's not essential, but it's nice to have that extra synergy in case you don't have an orb out at the time. So that's it for this part 3 of the Templar dungeon healing. Part 4, part 3.5, I guess, whatever you want to call it. It'll be out in a couple of days. It's going to be some trial healing. So I hope this guide helps, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.